Hello friends. Today we are going to discuss about what causes mental illnesses. I am Dr. Suresh Bharadmat, Professor of Psychiatry, working at NIMANS, Bangalore. The specific question I'm going to answer is what causes mental illness? In single line, at this point of time, we do not know exactly what causes mental illness. That means we are nowhere near to know the etiology of mental illness. Let's understand, in this era of artificial intelligence, why we are not able to find the reason for mental illness. First and the foremost, mental health is a spectrum. At one end of the spectrum is illness, on the other end of the spectrum is wellness. So, in between, whenever there is a severe stress, there is mental distress. So, mental health starts from wellness to illness and distress whenever there is a severe stress. So, what we are discussing here, what is mental illness? What is mental health? What is mental distress? That caseness has to be defined before we enter into discussion of what is the etiology. So here we need to know how many people who are distressed and who are suffering from mental illness. So let's look at the definition of WHO. The WHO said that mental health is a state of well-being that allows the individuals to realize their own abilities, cope with normal stress of life, work productively, and make contribution to their community. That means they're able to deal with the normal stress and contribute. That's how the mental health is defined. Now let's understand what is mental illness. Here, a significant disturbance in an individual thinking, emotions, regulations, or behavior, which is typically associated with the distress and or impairment in the areas of functioning. Here, this mental illness also includes mental distress with social bio-occupational function completely disturbed. With this definition, if we are going to look at the causes for mental illness, it will be very difficult. The simple reason is what is illness, what is distress, what is mental well being is very difficult to define because it is the disorders of thinking, emotions, regulations, and the behavior. Above this, there are cognitive dysfunctions, drug abuse, substance use. So it's not a single illness, it's a bouquet of illness. That means mental illness, there are more than 350 disorders which have been named under ICD 11. So, what is the current understanding? The current scientific understanding is mental illness is caused by complex interplay of biological, early childhood experiences, social, and environmental factors. That means it's not a single factor, multiple factors playing a role. So, we are unable to find a single cause. So, mental illness is not a single entity. As I mentioned, there are many illnesses available, and many a time they have a comorbidity. That means a person with OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, may also have bipolar affective disorder. That means he may have two or more mental illness. Further, invariably mental illness and mental disorders, they have been used interchangeably in various textbooks. Mental illness and mental disorder. Mental illness is a broader term, whereas mental disorder is specific to one disorder. For example, mental illness can be considered as a tree, disorder is each branch. Although they are interchangeable, but however, this is how it is classified. So here I'm talking about mental illness. So it's very difficult to find a single cause for mental illness. So if you look at this diagram, it clearly indicates biological causes such as genetics, neurodevelopmental, neurotransmitters related, and even neuroinflammation. Environmental causes such as drug abuse, substance use, childhood abuse, infection, trauma, toxin, nutritional causes. These can be considered as environmental causes. Social causes such as poverty, migration, family discord, maybe even backward community. So these kind of interplay between all these three factors may cause mental illness. So at this point of time, we do not know what is the exact cause, but invariably we know multiple factors play a role. Let's understand about under the biological causes, the most convincing is genetic causes. Invariably, brain development is directed by the genes. So, how do you say this? In simple words, when the ovum and sperm mates, invariably the chromosomes shared by the mother and father will develop into a child and then adolescent and a human being. Here, in clearly, various researchers have said genes forms the body and the environment and the experience play as a sculpture to form a sculpture. That is, early childhood experiences, trauma, and various critical periods. During that period, a person is developed. That means it is a combination of the genes and the environment and the experiences in his childhood forms a person. Recently, one interesting study published by Sandstorm and his colleagues in 2019 in Psychiatric Genetics. This study, titled as Offsprings of Parents with Schizophrenia, Bipolar Disorder, and Depression, a review of familial, high risk, and molecular genetic studies. Here, this is a very important study which looked into various psychiatric genetics. They brought in three important terms: Wave 1 genetic study, Wave 2 genetic study, and Wave 3. What is Wave 1? This occurred somewhere during 1950 to 1970s, during which various researchers looked into the risk of persons with schizophrenia having children developing schizophrenia. That means it looked only at the offsprings of schizophrenia, whether they develop or not. That is the Wave 1 study. Wave 2 looked into three generational studies. That is, grandparents, parents, and offspring. So, three generational studies were looked into in the Wave 2 studies that were somewhere around 1980s to 2000. During 2000, various genetic studies started coming up. Human Genome Project was completed, and invariably, more than the family studies, it looked into genes here. It not only looked into genes or genetics, it also looked into transdiagnostical hereditary factor. So that is the third wave of genetic study, my dear friends. So let's look into what are these genetic studies, how they have been found. Sandstorm clearly said that I'm talking about this study. If one parent has severe mental illness, the chances of child developing major depressive disorder is 15%, schizophrenia is 10%, and bipolar disorder is 5%. Any mental illness, it can be mild mental disorders like anxiety disorders, 35%. That is 1 in 3. If both the parents have mental illness, these chances which have been depicted will double. That is more than, like suppose the depression will become 30%, schizophrenia 20%, bipolar disorder 10%. That this is the very clearly the Sandstorm came up with this figure. Further, various other studies looked into concordance rate. Monozygotic twins, 40 to 60% in various severe mental disorder. Dizygotic twins was very less, 5 to 10%. Adoption studies were employed to address whether it is the environment or the parental role, or it can be genes. So these were also employed to know what is the role of genetics. Now it is very clear that genetics do play an important role in the development of mental illness. So how these have been, then why we are not able to answer clearly? Simple reason is genetics. It's not a single gene. Multiple genes are involved in development of schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. And again, these genes are polymorphism is there. Many times genetic mutation, dynamic gene expression, gene like switch on and off, which has been very well discussed in methylation, and histone, where the how the genes are regulated by epigenetics phenomena, anticipation, phenocopies. So all these clearly brings into a complex phenomena. With the difficulty, we'll not be able to tell, yes, these are the genes. So there may be many genes, and single gene may involved in formation of one trait, or multiple traits is single gene, or maybe one trait is being coded by many genes. So these kinds of variability has found it very difficult at this point of time to figure out how genetics is playing a role. Now the question is, genetic loading is there. One of the parent or the parent's brother is ill. So what? In this phenomena, an important study, Oliver and his colleagues in 2020 published an article. What causes the onset of psychosis in individuals at clinical high risk? A meta-analysis of risk and protective factors. I request all my viewers to go through this important article. They looked into the children of severe mental disorders who are having prodrome. And they also defined what is prodrome. The prodrome is attenuated psychotic symptoms without any clear-cut diagnosis, brief intermittent psychotic symptoms, genetic risk and functional decline has to be there. So this was the definition they used to call it as high risk. So they looked into various literature, did the research, systematic study. They collated 128 articles and looked into 26 different factors of prodrome which leads to psychosis. The meta-analysis looked into 27 risk factors, my dear friend. But however, only 3 factors played a role. That is attenuated psychotic symptoms, that is prodrome, global functioning decline, negative psychotic symptoms, not positive symptoms. Clearly said that these are the people who develop psychosis in the long run. So again, if you look at the figure, it clearly said about global functioning decline, attenuated positive psychosis, psychotic symptoms played a crucial role in the development of psychosis in the long run. So to summarize, with regard to genetics, there are 2 important. One is there is clearly the person is carrying genes lead to development of genetic susceptibility and development of illness. That is path A. Path B of genetics is mutation leading to the development of various psychiatric disorder. Now let's move into the epigenetics. Epigenetics is basically how the genes are regulated through environmental factors. Path C is basically highly susceptible genes are there, how they are regulated, and it is a transgenerational, my dear friends. Similarly, path D talks about which is reversible on and off phenomena of the genes, again, which is both of them are not demonstrated, but these are still a hypothesis. And various studies have been slowly accumulating evidences towards epigenetic phenomena. Now let's understand the perinatal causes, that is during childbirth. That is during the natal, that is perinatal, antenatal, and postnatal. During the development of the brain, this becomes very essential, my dear friends. As the ectoderm is formed, neuroectoderm, and then finally the development of brain. That is during antenatal, perinatal, postnatal. The neuronal migration occurs, pruning, and neuronal plasticity plays a crucial role here. What do you mean by neuronal migration? Here we have a huge number of neurons, somewhere around 860 billions neurons are there in our brain, and they need to go into specific places to form frontal lobe, temporal lobe, various nuclei, and they have to form the connection, that is pruning. And they may connect or they may disconnect, that is neuronal plasticity. So during this period, there may be something may go wrong, that is neurodevelopmental. During the development of the brain, there is something going wrong because of various reasons. It may be environmental, toxin, trauma, or the child not getting enough of nutrition. Further, the newer theory is maternal immune activation. That means the mother's immune system is creating trouble, so the neuronal migration is under threat. That is exposure to specific drugs. Maternal stress and undernutrition plays a crucial role in the development of the brain of the child. So neuronal developmental theory is also an important factor. So if you look at this figure, it clearly talks about DOHA-D, that is developmental origins of health and diseases theory, and fetal programming hypothesis. That means whenever there is an insult to the fetus through various environmental factors, it may be maternal immune system, drug exposure, maternal infection, undernutrition, may cause various neurodevelopmental disorder. So again, we look at this chart, it clearly talks about the first trimester. You can see the neurulation, that is a formation of neural tube. During that time, the formation of neural tube, again, something may go wrong. And this pregnancy this is the crucial period, that is the first trimester and the second trimester. Neurogenesis occurs in the second trimester. And again, microglial entry, which occurs in the first trimester, neuronal migration starts, and synaptogenesis, gliogenesis, and myelination, my dear friends. So all these neuronal development and maternal immune activation, drug exposure, stress on the mother can cause various lifelong insult to the brain of the fetus. So let's look into the various environmental and social factors. As you know, maternal infection, it may be bacterial, viral. During the childbirth, if the child does not take the breath, hypoxic brain injury, mother is not getting enough of nutrition, metabolic defect in the child or even in the mother, endocrinal disturbances in the mother, seizures, trauma, tumor, toxins, exposure to drugs, substance use by the mother, organic brain injury to the brain, which can cause various mental illness. So this is the hypothesis which has been put forward. Now let's look into the other important area which has been put forward by many researchers, that is sexual abuse and development of mental illness, especially the sexual abuse which occurs in the childhood has a lifelong risk for development of mental illness. Again, Laura and his colleagues published an important article in 2010 in Mayo Clinic Proceedings. This is the original article. And if you look at this article, the title, Sexual Abuse and Lifetime Diagnosis of Psychiatric Disorder, Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis, my dear friends. So this is a study which every psychiatrist before they get the graduation need to know. So this meta-analysis included 37 eligible studies, in that 17 case control, 20 cohort studies that included 31,62,318 participants, my dear friends. And when they did the analysis, there was no association between schizophrenia and somatization disorder with regard to sexual abuse. There were only few studies with regard to OCD. Then what is the finding of this study? This study clearly said that there is no association between schizophrenia and somatoform, but however, sexual abuse in childhood was associated with anxiety disorder, depression, eating disorder, PTSD, sleep disorder, and suicidal attempt, my dear friends. So this was one of the landmark study, according to me, which clearly indicated lifetime risk of developing these disorders. So after they controlled for various factors, depression, eating disorder, and PTSD continues to be a lifetime risk for a child who has been abused sexually. Similarly, another important article which was published in 2016 in Nature Review by Tyker and his colleagues, the effect of childhood maltreatment on the brain structure, function, and connectivity. Imagine if the child goes through domestic violence or abuse or sees parental divorce. What are the impact? This, again, a figure clearly indicates first column, parental verbal abuse. If there is a high parental verbal abuse, you can find there will be increased gray matter volume in the left auditory cortex. There is something going on. That means this is a imaging study which was done on children going through parental verbal abuse. Further, decreased integrity of left arcuate fasciculus was noted. The next important was when the child witnesses domestic violence. And you can see, especially in the occipital lobe, decreased gray matter volume in secondary visual cortex and decreased integrity of left inferior longitudinal fasciculus, my dear friends. And finally, childhood sexual abuse, decreased gray matter volume, again in the primary visual cortex and associated visual cortices, and thinning of somatosensory areas, my dear friends. These studies, imaging studies in children who are going through a tough time, sexual abuse, domestic violence, parental divorce, they found a lot of changes are occurring in the brain. So, by looking at all these imaging studies, they were able to say because of this environmental effect, the childhood abuse can cause various effect on the brain structure, functionality, and connectivity. That means it's not just the parents are fighting, or it is a domestic violence, or just a sexual abuse. It causes damage to the brain function, brain connectivity, because the child's brain is still pruning is occurring in the brain. Further, when there is a maltreatment on the child, structural deficits can be seen in the hippocampus, corpus callosum, anterior cingulate gyrus, orbitofrontal cortex, and dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, my dear friends. So these functional deficits have been observed again in the amygdala when viewing emotional phases doing various functional studies. So, my dear friends, it's not only genes, it is the environment, social factors. All these play a crucial role in the development of mental illness. Now, let's look into the various social and environmental factors. Social and environmental factors like disasters, emergencies, war, terrorism, climate change, poverty, migration from rural to urban area, urbanization, certain jobs like police, judicial officers, doctors are very prone to develop of mental illness, drug abuse, parental conflict, marital discord, relationship break, and severe stress. All these as environmental and social factors are the risk factor for development of mental illness. So what is the current approach? Life course approach is the one which has been found to be very useful in explaining the development of mental illness. Let's look into this diagram which clearly talked about starts from the pregnancy. During the pregnancy, what happens? That is in the antenatal and the natal, that is perinatal, and the child abuse, childhood experiences, trauma, adolescence, and then the adulthood, relationships, and in the geriatric. So this is the life course. In this life course, various things happen. So how we can explain this? Here, as I mentioned, the latent effect of the genes as a pregnant woman and the childbirth and during the childhood. The latent effect of the gene shows here, and the childhood illnesses can develop. That is, child psychiatry related illnesses may seen. And during the adolescence, this is where the pathway effect starts picking up. And finally, the cumulative effect. The cumulative effect of the environment, trauma, exposure to various toxins, and hormonal changes. All these cumulative effect will lead to development of various mental illness in the geriatric. So now the understanding is life course approach for the development of mental illness is accepted by various researchers, my dear friend. To conclude, mental disorder results from multifactorial involving genetics, epigenetics, social and environmental contributions play a crucial role. Neither alone one of the factors can be determined the development of mental illness. In simple word, gene loads the gun. Stress and the environment will trigger the illness, my dear friends. So without the genes, you will not have illness. With genes, without environment, nothing expresses. So genes loads the gun. Environment and social factors will pull the trigger, my dear friends. So this is how we can understand how the mental illness is caused. Thank you very much for your valuable time. Stay safe.